He sat in his car with his hands on the wheel, waiting for the officer to approach. He'd done this before. Every black man in America knows the routine. Stay calm, be respectful, don't make sudden moves, survive the encounter, and deal with the injustice later. But this time was different. This time, the officer didn't just question him, didn't just demand ID, didn't just make assumptions about who he was and why he was there. This time, within 60 seconds of approaching the vehicle, the officer deployed his taser, 50,000 volts of electricity coursing through the body of a man who was sitting still, complying with orders, doing nothing threatening. The man screamed, his body convulsed, bystanders filmed, and the officer stood there satisfied, convinced he'd neutralized a threat. What he didn't know, what he was about to discover in the most devastating way possible, was that the man he'd just tased wasn't a threat. He was Special Agent Marcus Williams of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, traveling on official business, carrying federal credentials, and now the subject of a federal investigation that would end the officer's career and potentially his freedom. You are about to witness what happens when a local cop attacks a federal agent and learns that some people aren't just protected by the law, they are the law, and the consequences are 25 years in federal prison. Saturday, June 17th, 2023, 3:47 p.m., Route 45 just outside Meridian, Mississippi. The afternoon sun hung high in a cloudless sky, casting harsh light across the two-lane highway that cut through rural Mississippi like a scar through green flesh. Route 45 was the kind of road that appeared on maps but felt forgotten in person, stretches of cracked asphalt flanked by dense pine forests, interrupted occasionally by weathered gas stations, abandoned buildings with rusted tin roofs, and hand-painted signs. Advertising boiled peanuts and fireworks. The heat was oppressive even with the air conditioning running, the kind of June heat that made the air shimmer above the pavement and turned car interiors into ovens within minutes. Special Agent Marcus Williams, 38 years old, had been with the FBI for 12 years, long enough to know that driving through the Deep South as a black man required constant vigilance, careful preparation, and an acceptance that sometimes doing everything right still wasn't enough to guarantee safety. He'd started as a field agent in the Chicago office fresh out of Quantico, eager and idealistic, believing that federal credentials and a badge would protect him from the casual racism and discrimination he'd experienced growing up. He'd worked his way up to senior investigative agent through skill, dedication, and an ability to navigate both the bureaucracy of the Bureau and the complex dynamics of criminal investigations, currently assigned to the Civil Rights Division. He specialized in investigating police misconduct, hate crimes, and civil rights violations, work that had made him both respected within the Bureau and deeply painfully aware of how quickly encounters with police could turn deadly, how thin the line was between a traffic stop and a funeral, how little protection a badge offered when the person stopping you couldn't see past your skin color. Marcus was driving a black Chevy Tahoe, an unmarked FBI vehicle, government-issued, freshly washed that morning before he'd left Jackson. The vehicle had federal plates clearly visible on both front and back, government registration stickers on the windshield, and an official vehicle identification number that would immediately flag it as federal property in any law enforcement database. He was traveling from Jackson, Mississippi, where he'd spent the past 3 days interviewing witnesses in a civil rights case involving alleged voter intimidation, to Memphis, where he'd catch a late evening flight back to Chicago and return to his wife and 2 young daughters who he hadn't seen in a week. He was in civilian clothes. He rarely wore suits when traveling through rural areas, having learned that looking too official sometimes created more problems than it solved. Today he wore dark jeans, a navy blue polo shirt that fit well but wasn't designer, and a lightweight tan jacket despite the June heat. The jacket served a dual purpose. It concealed his service weapon, a Glock 22 holstered on his right hip, and it covered his FBI credentials, which he kept clipped to his belt on his left side. He looked like what he was, a professional black man traveling for work, someone who could be a teacher, an accountant, a sales representative, any of 100 legitimate occupations, someone who should be able to drive down a public highway without fear. But fear was there anyway, sitting in his chest like a stone, because Marcus knew the statistics. He'd investigated enough cases to know that black men were stopped at disproportionate rates, searched more frequently, arrested more often, and killed more readily than their white counterparts. He'd seen the body cam footage, had read the autopsy reports, had interviewed the families left behind, when a routine traffic stop turned fatal. He'd stood in courtrooms and listened to officers testify about how they feared for their lives when confronting unarmed black men who were complying with orders. He knew that badge or no badge, credentials or no credentials, he was still a black man driving through Mississippi, and that made him a target. Route 45 was a two-lane highway cutting through rural Mississippi, the kind of road where local police like to run speed traps because there wasn't much else to do, where small-town departments funded themselves through traffic citations, where officers spent long shifts looking for any excuse to make a stop. Not much traffic at this hour on a Saturday, most. People were at home or at the few local businesses that stayed open on weekends. Occasionally, Marcus passed another vehicle, pickup trucks with Confederate flag stickers, rusted sedans with expired tags, the rare minivan probably belonging to someone passing through like himself. Pine trees stretched endlessly on either side of the road, their shadows creating patterns of light and dark across the asphalt. Marcus was driving exactly 55 mph, the posted speed limit, checking his speedometer every few minutes to ensure he didn't drift over, even by a single mile per hour. He'd learned long ago, through bitter experience, to never give cops an excuse, never provide a reason, never offer a justification for a stop. He used his turn signal when changing lanes, even though the highway was nearly empty. He kept both hands visible on the steering wheel, except when adjusting the radio or checking his phone at red lights. He maintained perfect lane discipline, never crossing the center line, never drifting onto the shoulder. He did everything exactly as the law required, operating under the exhausting reality that for him, perfection was the baseline, not the exception. But behind him, maintaining a steady distance of approximately 50 yards for the past 2 miles, was a Meridian police cruiser driven by Officer Travis Donovan. Officer Donovan was 31 years old, white, with the kind of build that suggested he'd been athletic in high school, but had softened around the edges in the years since. Not quite overweight, but no longer in fighting shape. He'd been with the Meridian police force for 6 years, long enough to develop firm opinions about his community, about crime, about who belonged and who didn't, but not long enough to have gained the wisdom or perspective that sometimes came with longer service. His career in law enforcement had been his second choice. He had originally wanted to join the military, had even gone through the enlistment process, but had been rejected during the final medical screening due to asthma and a previously undisclosed juvenile arrest record that he'd thought was sealed. Law enforcement had been his fallback, a way to still wear a uniform, carry a gun, exercise authority over others. He had 14 complaints in his file: use of excessive force, inappropriate searches, verbal abuse, racial profiling, intimidation of witnesses. The complaints painted a disturbing pattern: a man who saw his badge as a license to dominate rather than to serve, who interpreted questions as challenges, who viewed certain communities and certain people as inherently criminal. None of the complaints had resulted in significant discipline: a few days of suspension, always with pay, mandatory training sessions on de-escalation and implicit bias that Donovan had sat through with barely concealed contempt, doodling in the margins of his workbook, making sarcastic comments to fellow officers about political correctness and reverse racism. His supervisors knew he was problematic, knew he generated complaints at a rate far higher than other officers, knew that his behavior was a lawsuit waiting to happen. But the police union protected him. The bureaucracy of firing a cop was labyrinthine and time-consuming, and the department was perpetually short-staffed. Bad cops stayed on the force because removing them required more effort than keeping them, and the cost of their misconduct was borne by the citizens they brutalized rather than by the department that enabled them. Nothing that had changed his behavior, nothing that had made him question his assumptions, or examine his biases, or consider that the way he policed certain communities might be wrong. Donovan ran the Tahoe's plates through his mobile data terminal, the in-car computer system that allowed him to check vehicle registrations, driver's licenses, and criminal histories. Government vehicle, federal registration, registered to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, vehicle identification number matching the database, current tags, no wants or warrants, No flags in the system indicating the vehicle was stolen or involved in criminal activity. Everything checked out perfectly, exactly as it should, for a legitimate federal vehicle being driven by someone authorized to drive it. But Donovan was suspicious. The information from the computer didn't match what his gut was telling him, didn't align with his worldview, didn't make sense according to the assumptions he'd been operating under his entire career. A black man driving a federal vehicle? That didn't add up. That created cognitive dissonance that Donovan resolved not by questioning his assumptions, but by deciding the facts must be wrong. Maybe the vehicle was stolen, and the theft hadn't been reported yet. Maybe the plates were fake, sophisticated forgeries that could fool the automated system. Maybe this was drug-related. Federal agents didn't operate in Meridian, so why would a government vehicle be here unless something illegal was happening? In Donovan's mind, shaped by years of unchallenged prejudice and reinforced by a department culture that valued arrests over community relations, black people driving expensive vehicles late in the day through his jurisdiction were usually criminals. Drug dealers with ill-gotten money, car thieves with stolen property, gang members transporting weapons or contraband. The possibility that this might be a legitimate federal agent traveling for legitimate reasons couldn't compute, because it challenged the foundational assumptions about race and criminality that Donovan had built his entire career on. Donovan decided to pull him over and check it out. The phrase officers used when they wanted to make a stop, but didn't have legitimate probable cause. The euphemism that covered for profiling and fishing expeditions and violations of constitutional rights. He turned on his lights. The blue and red, strobes suddenly brilliant in the afternoon sun, visible for miles in both directions on the empty highway. Marcus saw the flashing lights in his rearview mirror and felt his stomach tighten with a familiar dread, a sensation he'd experienced too many times before, a combination of fear and anger and resignation that every black person in America knows intimately. The lights meant danger. They meant the next few minutes would determine whether he went home to his family or became another statistic, another hashtag, another name added to the too-long list of black men killed during traffic stops. He'd been stopped twice in the past 3 years, both times while traveling for work on legitimate FBI business, both times by local cops who couldn't believe a black man had any legitimate reason to be driving through their jurisdiction, both times ending with him being detained, questioned extensively, and eventually released when his credentials were verified through multiple phone calls, that the officers made grudgingly, skeptically, as if hoping to find proof that he was lying. Each encounter had left him shaken, angry, humiliated, forced to prove his legitimacy, to justify his existence, to demonstrate that he deserved the simple freedom to drive on a public road without harassment. But Marcus knew the drill by heart, had it memorized like a script he'd performed too many times. The routine had been taught to him by his father when he'd first gotten his driver's license at 16, reinforced by countless conversations with other black professionals who shared their own stories of stops and searches and humiliations. Stay calm. Don't give them an excuse. Survive the encounter. Deal with the injustice later. Live to see tomorrow. He activated his right turn signal, even though there was no other traffic to signal to, because following every rule mattered, because any deviation from perfect compliance could be interpreted as suspicious, as resistance, as justification for escalation. He checked his mirrors carefully, verified the shoulder was clear of debris, and carefully guided the Tahoe onto the gravel shoulder, bringing it to a complete stop about 10 feet from the highway's edge. He shifted into park with deliberate precision. He turned off the engine, removing any possibility of being accused of attempting to flee. He rolled down all 4 windows, driver, passenger, both rear, maximizing visibility into the vehicle, eliminating any shadows or concealment that might make the approaching officer nervous or provide an excuse for aggression. Then he turned on the interior dome lights, even though it was still daylight, because visibility was safety, because he wanted there to be no question about what was happening inside the vehicle, no ambiguity that could be interpreted as threat. The afternoon sun was still bright enough that the interior lights barely registered, but it was the principle that mattered, the demonstration of compliance, the signal that he was following every recommendation from every how to survive a traffic stop while black seminar he'd ever attended. He placed both hands on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions, fingers spread wide, palms pressed against the leather, clearly visible through the windshield. This was the posture recommended by every training session, every safety guide, every video about traffic stop survival. Hands visible at all times. No reaching, no sudden movements, no actions that could be misinterpreted or deliberately misinterpreted as threatening. His heart was beating faster than he wanted, adrenaline flooding his system in response to the perceived danger, his body preparing for fight or flight, even though he could do neither, even though his only option was to sit still and hope that compliance would be enough to keep him alive. He focused on his breathing, trying to slow it down, trying to appear calm, even though fear was crawling up his spine, trying to project non-threat in every aspect of his posture and demeanor. He waited, watching in his rearview mirror as the police cruiser sat behind him for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. The officer was running his plates, checking for warrants, looking for any excuse to escalate this stop into something more. Marcus knew the pattern. He'd seen it in hundreds of cases he'd investigated, in thousands of pages of police reports and body cam footage. The decision to escalate or de-escalate was often made in these first few moments, based not on actual threat, but on the officer's assumptions, biases, and mood. Donovan approached the driver's side window, with his hand resting on the grip of his service weapon, a Glock 22, standard issue from Meridian PD, loaded with hollow point ammunition, designed to expand on impact and cause maximum damage. His body cam was recording, a small camera clipped to his uniform shirt that captured everything from his perspective. Department policy required it for all traffic stops, though Donovan had learned that body cam footage could be conveniently corrupted or lost when it contradicted an officer's version of events. The camera's red recording light blinked steadily, documenting what would become the most expensive 60 seconds of Donovan's career. "License and registration," Donovan said, his voice hard and clipped, offering no greeting, no pleasantry, no explanation for why he'd initiated this stop. Just a command delivered in a tone that expected immediate obedience without question or hesitation, the voice of someone who viewed every interaction as a dominance contest that he was determined to win. "Good afternoon, officer," Marcus said calmly, deliberately injecting politeness into his voice despite the fear churning in his gut, maintaining the respectful tone that was supposed to de-escalate situations, but often didn't. That was supposed to prove he wasn't a threat, but rarely succeeded. "Before I reach for anything, I need to inform you that I'm a federal law enforcement officer. I'm armed. My weapon is on my right hip under my jacket. My credentials are on my belt on my left side. My driver's license is in my wallet in my back right pocket. How would you like me to proceed?" This was the exact script Marcus had been trained to use during FBI Academy training on officer safety, the protocol for law enforcement officers involved in traffic stops. Identify yourself as law enforcement immediately. Declare any weapons proactively. Ask for specific instructions before making any movements. De-escalate through transparency and compliance. The script was designed to prevent misunderstandings, to establish professional courtesy between fellow law enforcement officers, to signal that you were part of the same tribe, that you understood the dangers they faced, that you were on the same side. But Donovan's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened, his jaw tightening, his eyes narrowing with suspicion rather than recognition. "You're a what?" he asked, his tone heavy with skepticism, with the clear implication that he didn't believe a word Marcus had just said. "Federal law enforcement, FBI, Special Agent Marcus Williams," Marcus repeated, keeping his voice steady, professional, trying not to let the fear and frustration bleed through. "My credentials are on my belt on my left side. Would you like me to retrieve them so you can verify my identity?" "Slowly," Donovan said, his hand tightening on his weapon, his finger moving from the frame to rest alongside the trigger guard. Not on the trigger itself, not yet, but close enough to be ready, close enough to send a message about how quickly this could turn lethal. His stance shifted, body angling slightly to the side, positioning himself to draw and fire if necessary, following the tactical training that taught officers to treat every encounter as potentially fatal, to assume threat, until proven otherwise, to shoot first and ask questions later if they felt even the slightest hint of danger. Marcus moved very slowly, very deliberately, telegraphing every movement with exaggerated care. "I'm moving my left hand now," he narrated, speaking clearly for the body cam that was recording everything, creating an audio record that might protect him if this went wrong. I'm reaching down to my belt. I'm removing my credentials from my belt clip. I'm bringing them up to show you. He reached for his belt on his left side with glacial slowness, his fingers finding the leather credential case clipped there. A black leather wallet that folded open to display his badge on one side and his photo identification on the other. He unclipped it carefully, brought it up to chest level where Donovan could see it clearly, and held it out toward the window. He held it up for Donovan to see, the badge catching the afternoon sunlight, the FBI seal clearly visible, the gold shield, unmistakable even to someone who'd never seen one before. Donovan took the credentials from Marcus's hand, snatching them with more force than necessary, a small gesture of dominance and control. He examined them under the bright afternoon sun, holding them at arm's length, tilting them to catch the light, studying every detail with suspicious intensity. The badge was real, heavy, metallic, with the distinctive FBI seal, the eagle with spread wings clutching arrows and an olive branch. The words Federal Bureau of Investigation engraved around the perimeter, special agent designation clearly marked below. The ID card had Marcus Williams's photo, taken 6 months ago during his last credential renewal, showing him in a suit and tie, professional and serious. The card had all the security features: holographic seal, embedded chip, micro-printing around the edges, official signatures, serial numbers that could be verified through FBI databases. But Donovan wasn't convinced. He turned, the credentials over in his hands, looking for flaws, for evidence of forgery, for any indication that these might be fake. "How do I know this is real?" Donovan asked, the question loaded with accusation, with the presumption that, of course, these were fake, that, of course, a black man claiming to be FBI was lying, that the burden of proof was on Marcus to demonstrate his legitimacy to Donovan's satisfaction, rather than on Donovan to justify the stop. "You can call the FBI field office in Jackson," Marcus said patiently, though patience was becoming harder to maintain, though he could feel his composure beginning to fray around the edges. "They can verify my identity and my assignment. The duty agent number is on the back of the ID card, 601-938-5000. You can call them right now. They'll confirm I'm Special Agent Marcus Williams, that I'm currently on assignment traveling through Mississippi, that I'm authorized to carry a federal weapon, that this vehicle is properly assigned to me. This can all be verified in less than 5 minutes with a single phone call. Or these are fake," Donovan said, dismissing Marcus's suggestion entirely, refusing to even consider the possibility that the credentials might be legitimate, that his assumption might be wrong. "Or you stole them from a real agent, or you're impersonating a federal officer. I've seen fake badges before. Criminals buy them online. They look real enough to fool people." Marcus felt a surge of frustration and fear. This wasn't going according to script. Donovan wasn't following the professional courtesy that should exist between law enforcement officers. He wasn't de-escalating. He was doing the opposite, building a case, manufacturing justifications, creating a narrative where Marcus was the threat rather than a fellow officer traveling on legitimate business. "Officer, I assure you they're not fake," Marcus said, his voice still calm, but with an edge now, a hint of steel beneath a professional. "Courtesy. I'm traveling on official FBI business. I've been in Jackson for the past 3 days conducting witness interviews in a civil rights case. I'm heading to Memphis to catch a flight back to Chicago. Everything I'm telling you can be verified. I'm happy to cooperate with any verification you need to do, but I need to ask, why did you pull me over? Was I speeding? Did I commit a traffic violation? Did my vehicle match the description of a stolen car or a suspect vehicle?" These were legitimate questions Marcus had every right to ask, questions that should have been answered at the beginning of the stop. Officers were required to have reasonable suspicion of a specific violation to justify a traffic stop. They couldn't just pull people over randomly or based on hunches or because they didn't like the way someone looked. But Marcus knew that theory and practice often diverged, that constitutional requirements were frequently ignored, that "I had a hunch" or something seemed off were considered sufficient justification by many departments and many courts. "I'll ask the questions," Donovan snapped, his voice rising in volume and aggression, asserting dominance, refusing to answer, shutting down any attempt at dialogue or explanation. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus's heart rate spiked. This was the moment when traffic stops turned dangerous, when the dynamic shifted from encounter to confrontation, when the risk of violence increased exponentially. Being ordered out of a vehicle meant the officer had decided you were a threat, had moved beyond routine stop into something more serious, had determined that you needed to be controlled rather than simply cited or warned. "Officer, I've identified myself as a federal agent," Marcus said, trying one more time to de-escalate, to inject reason into a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond reason. "I've shown you my credentials. I'm armed, as I disclosed immediately. I'm sitting in a federal vehicle. Is there a specific reason you need me to exit the vehicle? If you're concerned about my weapon, I can keep my hands visible while you verify my credentials through the FBI field office. That would resolve any questions you have without requiring me to exit the vehicle." This was the professional approach, the way trained law enforcement officers were supposed to handle situations involving other armed officers. Verify credentials, confirm identity, resolve questions through proper channels, maintain officer safety through communication rather than confrontation. But Donovan wasn't interested in the professional approach. "I said step out of the vehicle," he shouted, his voice now loud enough to echo across the empty highway, loud enough to carry to the gas station across the road where the woman was beginning to film on her phone, loud enough to leave no doubt that this had moved from encounter to confrontation. "I'm not refusing," Marcus said, keeping his voice deliberately calm, despite the fear and anger warring inside him, trying to maintain control of the situation even as it slipped further and further beyond his control. "But I need to understand why you're ordering me out of the vehicle. You haven't provided a reason for this stop. You haven't identified any violation. I've complied with every request. I've been respectful and cooperative. I'm a federal agent on official business. What is the legal basis for ordering me to exit my vehicle?" Marcus was citing law, citing procedure, citing the constitutional requirements that were supposed to govern police conduct. But he knew, even as he spoke, that reciting the law to someone who didn't care about the law was an exercise in futility. He knew that in this moment, on this highway, with this officer, the law meant whatever Donovan said, it meant. Power trumped procedure. Authority superseded rights. And a badge was only protection if the person confronting you respected what it represented. "Out! Now!" Marcus knew he had two choices, comply and hope. This resolved peacefully, or refuse and potentially escalate to a situation where he might have to pull rank or defend himself. Neither option was good. He made his decision. "Officer, I'm going to comply. I'm going to open my door slowly and step out. My weapon is still on my right hip. I'm going to keep my hands visible." "Don't move!" Donovan suddenly shouted, his voice rising with panic or aggression. Marcus couldn't tell which. Marcus froze, his hand on the door handle. "I'm not moving. You told me to exit the vehicle. I'm trying to comply." "You're reaching for something." "I'm reaching for the door handle to exit the vehicle as you ordered." Marcus's voice was still calm, but there was an edge of fear now. He recognized the pattern, an officer manufacturing a threat, creating justification for force. He'd investigated dozens of cases like this. He knew how they ended. "I'm going to exit the vehicle now," Marcus said clearly, for the body cam recording. "My hands are visible. I am not reaching for my weapon. I am complying with your order to step out." He opened the door slowly and began to turn in his seat to step out. And that's when Donovan deployed his taser. The probes hit Marcus in the chest, 50,000 volts of electricity locking every muscle. He screamed, an involuntary cry of pain and shock. His body convulsed. He fell partially out of the car, his legs tangled in the seatbelt, his torso on the ground. Donovan deployed the taser again. Another 5-second cycle, another wave of agony. Marcus couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except endure. Across the highway, a woman sitting in her car at a gas station parking lot had her phone out, filming. She'd seen the whole thing, a black man sitting calmly in his car, a white cop approaching aggressively, and then the taser deployment with no apparent provocation. Donovan grabbed Marcus, who was still, convulsing from the taser, and wrenched his arms behind his back. Handcuffs clicked shut. "You're under arrest," Donovan said, breathing hard, his voice shaky with adrenaline. "For what?" Marcus managed to gasp out. "Resisting arrest, assaulting an officer. We'll figure the rest out at the station." "I didn't resist. I didn't assault anyone." "Shut up," Donovan said. He dragged Marcus to the police cruiser and shoved him into the back seat. Marcus sat there, his body still trembling from the taser, his mind racing. He was an FBI agent. He'd been tased without cause. This was assault on a federal officer, civil rights violation, excessive force. Donovan had just committed multiple federal crimes. But right now, Marcus was just a black man in the back of a police car, in pain, in handcuffs, in a small Mississippi town where the local cops had all the power. Or so it seemed. Donovan drove Marcus to the Meridian Police Department, a squat brick building on 23rd Avenue. It was 4:15 p.m. The station was moderately busy, Saturday afternoon, few officers on duty, mostly handling minor incidents. Donovan brought Marcus inside through the rear entrance, still handcuffed, walking unsteadily from the taser. Several officers looked up as Donovan paraded his arrest through the station. "What you got, Donovan?" asked Sergeant Michael Reynolds, the shift supervisor, a black man in his late 40s who'd been with Meridian PD for 22 years. "Resisting arrest," Donovan said. "Maybe federal impersonation." He had fake FBI credentials. "Fake?" Reynolds frowned. "How do you know they're fake?" "They have to be. This guy's just some random black dude driving a federal vehicle. Probably stolen." Reynolds walked over to Marcus, who was standing quietly, still recovering. "Sir, what's your name?" "Special Agent Marcus Williams," Marcus said, his voice steady now, despite the pain. "FBI, badge number 7734. I was traveling on official business when Officer C. Donovan pulled me over without cause and tased me while I was complying with his orders." Reynolds' eyes widened. "You're FBI?" "Yes, sir. My credentials are in Officer Donovan's possession. You can verify my identity by calling the FBI field office in Jackson. The duty agent number is 601-948-5000. Ask for Supervisory Special Agent Patricia Chen. She's my direct supervisor. She can confirm my assignment and my identity." Reynolds turned to Donovan. "Did you call to verify?" "I didn't need to verify," Donovan said defensively. "I know fake credentials when I see them. Show me the credentials." Donovan pulled out Marcus's FBI credentials from his pocket and handed them to Reynolds. Reynolds examined them carefully. The badge was heavy, metal, clearly official. The ID card had multiple security features. Everything looked legitimate. "Donovan, these don't look fake," Reynolds said quietly. "They have to be—" "No, they don't have to be," Reynolds interrupted. "You just assumed they were fake because you couldn't believe a black man could be FBI. Is that about right?" Donovan's face flushed. "That's not— I was just— Just what? Just profiling? Just making assumptions?" Reynolds pulled out his phone and dialed the number Marcus had provided. The call was answered on the second ring. "FBI Jackson Field Office. This is Special Agent Rodriguez." "This is Sergeant Reynolds, Meridian Police Department. I need to verify the identity of someone claiming to be one of your agents. Badge number 7734, name Marcus Williams." There was a pause, typing sounds. Then, "That's Special Agent Marcus Williams, Senior Investigative Agent, Civil Rights Division. He's currently on assignment traveling through Mississippi. Is there a problem?" "You could say that," Reynolds said. "One of my officers just tased him and arrested him during a traffic stop." The silence on the other end was profound. Then, in a much sharper tone, "You did what?" "We have him in custody. He's handcuffed. He was tased. I need to speak with his supervisor immediately." "Hold on." 30 seconds later, a woman's voice came on the line, clipped and furious. "This is Supervisory Special Agent Patricia Chen. Who am I speaking with?" "Sergeant Michael Reynolds, Meridian PD. Ma'am, we have Special Agent Marcus Williams in custody. He was stopped by one of our officers and— If Marcus is injured, if he's been harmed in any way, I will have federal agents at your station within the hour and your entire department will be under investigation. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am. He's here. He appears to be okay, aside from being tased." "He was tased?" Chen's voice rose. "A federal agent on official business was tased by local police?" "Yes, ma'am. Remove his handcuffs immediately. I want to speak with him, and I want the name and badge number of every officer involved. This is now a federal matter." Reynolds looked at Donovan, who had gone pale. "Officer Donovan, remove the handcuffs. Now." Donovan fumbled with his keys and unlocked Marcus's handcuffs. Marcus rubbed his wrists, then took the phone from Reynolds. "This is Marcus." "Marcus, are you hurt?" Chen's voice was still angry, but also concerned. "I'm okay, taser burns, but nothing serious." "What happened?" Marcus gave a brief summary, pulled over without cause, identified himself, showed credentials, was ordered out of the vehicle, tased while complying, arrested. "Did you resist?" "No, I did everything by the book. It's on his body cam." "Good. I'm calling the U.S. Attorney's Office right now. Federal prosecutors will be reviewing this. Marcus, do not make any statements beyond what you've already said. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. You're the victim here, not the suspect. Understood?" "Understood. I'll have agents from Jackson at that station within 90 minutes. Sit tight. And Marcus?" "Yes. I'm sorry this happened to you." Marcus handed the phone back to Reynolds, who finished the call with Chen, confirming that federal authorities were en route. When Reynolds hung up, the station was silent. Every officer within earshot had heard the conversation. Everyone understood what had just happened. A local cop had just tased an FBI agent. Reynolds looked at Donovan with an expression somewhere between fury and disbelief. "My office, now." Donovan followed Reynolds into the sergeant's office. Through the glass window, Marcus could see Reynolds shouting, gesturing, Donovan trying to explain or defend himself. Marcus sat down carefully in a chair in the main area. An officer brought him water and a first aid kit to treat the taser burns on his chest. No one spoke to him beyond necessary questions about his injuries. Everyone knew this was bad, really bad. 40 minutes later, 2 FBI agents arrived from the Jackson field office. Special Agent David Park and Special Agent Jennifer Martinez, both in suits, both carrying the authority of the federal government. They spoke briefly with Reynolds, then with Marcus. They examined the taser burns. They took photographs. They collected Donovan's body cam footage and dash cam footage. They took statements from every officer who had been present. Then they spoke with Donovan. The interview lasted 20 minutes. When it was over, Special Agent Park approached Marcus. "We're taking you to the hospital for a full examination. Then we're bringing you back to Jackson. You're not under arrest. You're not being detained. You're free to go. The U.S. Attorney's Office has been notified. They'll be launching a criminal investigation into Officer Donovan's conduct." Marcus nodded. "What happens to him?" "That's up to the prosecutors," Park said. "But assaulting a federal officer, civil rights violations, excessive force under color of law, we're looking at federal charges, serious ones." They walked out of the station together. As Marcus left, he caught a glimpse of Donovan sitting in Reynolds' office, his head in his hands, realizing that his career, and possibly his freedom, was over. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Mississippi moved quickly. Within 72 hours, federal prosecutors had opened a formal investigation into Officer Travis Donovan's conduct. The lead prosecutor was Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Morrison, a black woman in her early 40s with a reputation for being thorough, aggressive, and uncompromising in civil rights cases. She reviewed the evidence. Body cam footage. Clear video showing Marcus sitting calmly in his vehicle, identifying himself as FBI, showing credentials, complying with orders, and being tased without provocation. Donovan's voice on the audio showed no indication that Marcus was threatening or resisting. Dash cam footage. Showing the traffic stop from Donovan's vehicle. Marcus's car never swerved, never exceeded the speed limit, gave no indication of criminal activity. Witness video. The woman at the gas station had captured the taser deployment on her phone. The video clearly showed Marcus halfway out of his vehicle, hands visible, no threatening movements, when Donovan tased him. Medical records. Marcus had been treated at Meridian Regional Hospital for taser burns, contusions, and elevated heart rate. The emergency room doctor had documented the injuries and noted that taser deployment on a healthy adult carried risk of cardiac arrest or death. Donovan's statement. In his initial report, Donovan claimed Marcus had reached for something, was acting suspicious, and refused to comply with lawful orders. All of these claims were contradicted by the video evidence. Donovan's personnel file. 14 prior complaints. Pattern of excessive force against black suspects. Previous use of taser in questionable circumstances. Training record showing he'd been disciplined for similar conduct, but never seriously punished. Federal statute violations. 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 111, assault on a federal officer. 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 1001, false statements to federal investigators. Rachel Morrison sat in her office reviewing the case file and knew this was prosecutable. More than prosecutable, this was a slam dunk. She called Marcus to schedule a formal interview. They met at the FBI field office in Jackson in a secure conference room. Marcus had been on administrative leave since the incident, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because FBI policy required it when an agent was involved in a significant use of force incident, even as a victim. Agent Williams, Rachel began, I want to start by saying, I'm sorry this happened to you. No federal agent, no person, should be subjected to what you experienced. Thank you, Marcus said. I've reviewed all the evidence. I believe we have multiple federal charges we can bring against Officer Donovan, but before we move forward, I need to hear from you. Walk me through what happened, in your own words. Marcus did. He described the stop in detail, his compliance, his calm demeanor, his identification as FBI, his disclosure of being armed, his careful movements, and Donovan's sudden deployment of the taser. Did you at any point make any movement that could be construed as reaching for a weapon? Rachel asked. I was reaching for the door handle to exit the vehicle as he'd ordered. My weapon was holstered on my right hip. The door handle is on my left. There's no reasonable way to interpret that movement as threatening. Did you verbally threaten him? No, I was calm and respectful throughout. It's on the body cam. Why do you think he tased you? Marcus paused. Because I'm black. Because he couldn't believe a black man could legitimately be FBI. Because when I stayed calm and articulate, instead of getting scared or angry, it didn't fit his stereotype, and that made him more aggressive. I've investigated cases like this. I know the pattern. Rachel nodded. Agent Williams, I'm going to be direct. This case will likely go to trial. That means you'll have to testify. You'll be cross-examined. The defense will try to paint you as confrontational or threatening. They'll try to justify Donovan's actions. Are you prepared for that? I've testified in dozens of trials, Marcus said. I know how to handle cross-examination. This is different. You're the victim, not the investigator. It's personal. I understand. And yes, I'm prepared. I want Officer Donovan held accountable. Not just for what he did to me, but for the pattern of behavior that led to it. How many other people has he brutalized who didn't have a badge to protect them? That's what I needed to hear, Rachel said. We're moving forward with prosecution. 6 weeks later, a federal grand jury returned a 4-count indictment against Travis Donovan. Count 1. Assault on a federal officer, 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 111, maximum sentence 20 years. Count 2, spot. Deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 242, maximum sentence 10 years. Count 3. Excessive force in violation of constitutional rights, maximum sentence 10 years. Count 4. False statements to federal investigators, 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 1001, maximum sentence 5 years. If convicted on all counts, Donovan faced a maximum of 45 years in federal prison. The recommended sentencing guidelines suggested 15 to 25 years. Donovan was arrested at his home by FBI agents. He was arraigned, pleaded not guilty, and was released on $100,000 bond with conditions. Surrender his passport, no contact with Marcus Williams, no possession of firearms. His attorney, a criminal defense lawyer named Thomas Richardson, immediately went to the media claiming the charges were overreach, that Donovan was a dedicated officer who'd made a split-second judgment call in a tense situation. But the video footage leaked online. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed millions of times. The comments were unanimous. Donovan had assaulted an unarmed, compliant black man for no reason. The fact that the victim was FBI made the story national news, but the underlying issue was universal. Part 4. The Trial. The trial began on a Monday in February, 8 months after the incident. The federal courthouse in Jackson was packed. Journalists, civil rights advocates, other FBI agents, and members of the public who wanted to see justice. Marcus sat in the gallery, not at the prosecutor's table. He was a witness, not an attorney in this case. He wore a suit and maintained his composure. speaking to no one except his family who sat beside him. Donovan sat at the defense table, looking smaller than he had in his uniform. Without the badge, the gun, the authority of his position, he was just a man facing the consequences of his actions. Opening statements were stark. Rachel Morrison addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about abuse of power. It's about a police officer who saw a black man and decided, without evidence, without justification, without reason, that he was a criminal. Officer Donovan had every piece of information he needed to know that Marcus Williams was a federal agent on official business. He had the credentials. He had the vehicle registration. He had Marcus's calm, respectful compliance. But none of that mattered because Officer Donovan had already decided that a black man couldn't possibly be FBI. So, he escalated, he tased, he arrested, and he filed false reports trying to justify his actions. Today, we hold him accountable." The defense attorney, Thomas Richardson, tried to frame it differently. Officer Donovan was doing his job. He saw a suspicious vehicle, he pulled it over, and when the driver became argumentative and made suspicious movements, he used non-lethal force to control the situation. Was he perfect? No. But he was trying to go home safe at the end of his shift. Don't punish him for that. The trial proceeded methodically. The prosecution played the body cam footage. The jury watched Marcus sitting calmly, hands visible, speaking respectfully. They heard him identify himself as FBI. They saw him show his credentials. They heard Donovan's aggressive tone, his refusal to verify Marcus's identity, his sudden escalation. And they saw the taser deployment. Marcus's scream, his body convulsing, the cruelty of it. Several jurors looked away. One woman was crying. The prosecution called expert witnesses. Dr. James Patterson, use of force expert, testified that taser deployment was only justified when a subject posed an active threat. Marcus, sitting in his vehicle complying with orders, posed no threat. Dr. Sarah Chen, civil rights expert, testified about the pattern of racial profiling in police stops, about how black professionals are disproportionately targeted, about how implicit bias leads to excessive force. FBI Supervisory Special Agent Patricia Chen testified about Marcus's exemplary record, his training in de-escalation, his history of professional conduct. She also testified that Marcus had been traveling on official business and was fully authorized to be armed. And then Rachel Morrison called Marcus to the stand. Marcus walked to the witness box, was sworn in, and took his seat. He looked directly at the jury, calm and professional. Rachel began gently. "Agent Williams, please tell the jury about your career with the FBI." Marcus described his 12 years of service, his assignments, his cases. He spoke about his work in the Civil Rights Division, investigating police misconduct. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. "On June 17, 2023, what were you doing?" "I was traveling from Jackson to Memphis for official business. I was driving a government-issued vehicle on Route 45 when Officer Donovan pulled me over." "What happened during that stop?" Marcus narrated the entire encounter, speaking clearly and without emotion. He described his compliance, his identification, his calm demeanor. "When Officer Donovan ordered you out of the vehicle, what did you do?" "I told him I was going to comply. I announced I was reaching for the door handle. I kept my hands visible. I moved slowly and deliberately." "And then?" "He tased me." "Were you reaching for your weapon?" "No, my weapon was holstered on my right hip. I was reaching for the door handle with my left hand." "Were you threatening Officer Donovan in any way?" "No." "Were you resisting arrest?" "No, I was complying with his order to exit the vehicle." Rachel played the body cam footage again, freezing it at the moment before the taser deployment. "Agent Williams, this is the moment before you were tased. What are you doing in this image?" "I'm turning in my seat to step out of the vehicle. My hands are visible. I'm not holding anything. I'm not reaching for my weapon." "And then Officer Donovan tased you?" "Yes." Rachel let that sit for a moment. "How did it feel?" "Objection." Richardson stood. "Relevance." "Your Honor, the defense has claimed the taser was non-lethal force. I'm establishing the actual impact," Rachel said. "Overruled. The witness may answer." Marcus looked at the jury. "It felt like I was being electrocuted. Every muscle in my body locked. I couldn't control my movements. I fell out of the car. I thought I might die. I've investigated cases where people died from taser deployment. I knew it was possible. Were you afraid? Terrified. Not just of the pain, but of what might happen next. I was a black man being brutalized by a white cop in rural Mississippi. I know how these encounters end. But your FBI, didn't that protect you? Not in that moment. In that moment, I was just another black man that Officer Donovan had decided was a criminal. My badge meant nothing to him. The defense. Cross-examined, but there was nothing to attack. Marcus's testimony was consistent with the video, with his prior statements, with every piece of evidence. Richardson tried. Agent Williams, isn't it true you refused to show identification? No, I showed my FBI credentials immediately. Isn't it true you were argumentative? No, I was calm and respectful. It's on the video. You were armed? I disclosed that immediately, as I'm trained to do. I never reached for my weapon. Richardson had nothing. The evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution rested. The defense put on a weak case. Donovan claimed he felt threatened, that Marcus's movements seemed suspicious, that he was just trying to go home safe. But the video contradicted everything. After 3 days of testimony and 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. On count 1, assault on a federal officer, how do you find? Guilty. On count 2, deprivation of rights under color of law, how do you find? Guilty. On count 3, excessive force, how do you find? Guilty. On count 4, false statements, how do you find? Guilty. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom reacted with gasps and murmurs. Marcus sat quietly, showing no emotion. Donovan put his head in his hands. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In federal court, sentencing guidelines are calculated based on the severity of the crime, the defendant's criminal history, and aggravating or mitigating factors. For Donovan, the calculations were damning. Assault on a federal officer, base offense level 21. Victim was vulnerable, tased while sitting in car. +2, abuse of position of trust, police officer. +2, obstruction of justice, false statements. +2, pattern of similar conduct, prior complaints. +2, total offense level, 29. With no prior criminal convictions, Donovan fell into criminal history category-wise. The sentencing guidelines recommended 108 months, approximately 7 to 9 years. But Rachel Morrison argued for an upward departure, seeking the maximum 25 years allowed by statute. She filed a sentencing memorandum detailing why. Defendant Donovan's conduct was not an isolated mistake, but part of a pattern of abuse. His personnel file shows 14 complaints of excessive force, primarily against black suspects. He was trained multiple times on proper use of force and civil rights. He knew his conduct was unlawful. He chose to do it anyway. And then he lied to cover it up. Defendant tased a federal agent who was sitting calmly in his vehicle, complying with orders, posing no threat. This was not a split-second decision under uncertain circumstances. This was a deliberate assault motivated by racial bias. The victim, Special Agent Williams, has dedicated his career to investigating exactly this type of misconduct. The irony of him becoming a victim of the same abuse he fights against underscores the pervasiveness of the problem. This court should send a clear message. Police officers who abuse their authority, who violate civil rights, who use violence against those they're sworn to protect, will face serious consequences. Not a few months, not probation, but years in federal prison. The government requests a sentence of 25 years. The defense filed their own memorandum arguing for leniency. Donovan had no prior criminal record, had served his community, had a family, had shown remorse. But the evidence of remorse was thin. Donovan had maintained throughout that he'd acted appropriately, that Marcus had been threatening, that the prosecution was overreach. Only after the guilty verdict did he begin claiming he was sorry. On sentencing day, the courtroom was again packed. Judge Richard Morrison, no relation to the prosecutor, presided. He was a black man in his 60s, a former civil rights attorney who'd been appointed to the federal bench 15 years earlier. "Mr. Donovan, please stand," Judge Morrison said. Donovan stood, flanked by his attorneys. "I've reviewed the presentence report, the sentencing memorandums from both parties, and all the evidence presented at trial. I've also reviewed your personnel file, Mr. Donovan, and I'm troubled by what I see." Judge Morrison looked at Donovan directly. You had 14 complaints against you, 14 opportunities to change your behavior, 14 warnings that your conduct was problematic. But you didn't change. You didn't learn. You continued to abuse your authority, to use excessive force, to violate the rights of the people you were supposed to protect. On June 17, 2023, you pulled over a federal agent for no legitimate reason. You questioned his credentials despite clear evidence of their authenticity. You escalated the situation without justification, and then, while he was complying with your orders, while he posed no threat, while he was sitting in his vehicle, you tased him. You could have killed him, Mr. Donovan. Taser deployment carries. Risk of cardiac arrest, of death. You didn't care. You just wanted to hurt someone you decided was a threat based on nothing more than the color of his skin. And then you lied about it. You filed false reports. You claimed Agent Williams was threatening you, was resisting arrest, was reaching for something. All lies, all contradicted by your own body cam footage. Judge Morrison paused. Mr. Donovan, you betrayed the badge you wore. You violated the oath you took. You committed federal crimes while acting under color of law. And you showed no remorse until you were convicted. The sentencing guidelines recommend 87 to 108 months. The government has requested an upward departure to 25 years. I've considered both recommendations. The courtroom was silent. Taking into account the severity of your conduct, the pattern of abuse documented in your file, the vulnerability of your victim, and the need to deter other law enforcement officers from similar misconduct, I am sentencing you as follows. On count 1, assault on a federal officer, 20 years. On count 2, deprivation of rights, 10 years to run concurrently. On count 3, excessive force, 10 years to run concurrently. On count 4, false statements, 5 years to run concurrently. Total sentence, 20 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. 20 years. Not the maximum 25 the prosecution requested, but close. Donovan's face crumpled. His attorney whispered urgently to him. His family in the gallery was crying. Marcus sat quietly, showing no reaction. Mr. Donovan, you will report to the U.S. Marshal for immediate remand to custody, Judge Morrison said. Court is adjourned. U.S. Marshals moved forward to take Donovan into custody. He was handcuffed, the same handcuffs he'd used on Marcus, and led out of the courtroom toward federal prison. Marcus stood and walked out with Rachel Morrison and his fellow FBI agents. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but Marcus made only a brief statement. I'm grateful for the jury's verdict and the judge's sentence. This case was never about me personally. It was about accountability. Police officers who abuse their power, who violate constitutional rights, who use violence without justification, must face consequences. Today, Officer Donovan faced those consequences. I hope this serves as a message to every law enforcement officer. The badge doesn't give you the right to harm people, and if you do, the law will hold you accountable. He walked away without taking questions. The case of United States versus Travis Donovan became a landmark in civil rights prosecution. The 20-year sentence was one of the harshest ever imposed for assault on a federal officer and excessive force. Donovan appealed, arguing the sentence was excessive. His appeal was denied. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the conviction and sentence in a published opinion that cited the case as precedent for future prosecutions. Donovan is currently serving his sentence at FCI Butner Medium in North Carolina. He'll be eligible for release in Taser 40 after serving approximately 17 years. Federal prisoners must serve at least 85% of their sentence. Marcus Williams returned to duty with the FBI. He continued working in the Civil Rights Division, investigating police misconduct. But the experience changed him. He became more vocal about the need for reform, more willing to speak publicly about his own experience. A year after the trial, Marcus was promoted to supervisory special agent, leading a team of agents investigating excessive force cases across the Southeast. The Meridian Police Department was placed under a federal consent decree requiring reforms to training, oversight, and accountability. Several other officers with complaint histories similar to Donovan's were terminated. And across the country, the case was cited in police academies, in courtrooms, in congressional hearings about police reform. It became shorthand for the consequences of unchecked authority and racial bias in law enforcement. 2 years after the sentencing, Marcus was invited to speak at the FBI Academy in Quantico, training new agents on civil rights investigations and use of force. A young trainee, white, approached him after the session. "Sir, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead," Marcus said. "When Officer Donovan tased you, when you were sitting there in pain, handcuffed, humiliated, what were you thinking?" Marcus considered. "I was thinking that this happens to black people every day, that most of them don't have a badge to protect them. Most of them don't have the FBI coming to their defense. Most of them just have to survive the encounter and hope they don't end up dead. But you did have the badge, and he still did it." "Exactly," Marcus said, which tells you how deep the problem goes. If a cop will tase an FBI agent on video, imagine what he'll do to someone with no badge, no camera, no federal protection. So what's the answer? Accountability, Marcus said. Real accountability, not a slap on the wrist, not paid leave, not a transfer to another department, 20 years in federal prison. That's accountability. And when officers know the consequences are real, when they know that badge doesn't protect them from the law, maybe then behavior changes. Did Donovan's sentence change anything? In Meridian, yes. Excessive force complaints dropped 60% in the 2 years since his sentencing. Officers are more careful, more respectful, because they saw what happened to Donovan and they don't want that to be them. Marcus paused. But nationwide, we still have a long way to go. This was one cop, one case, one sentence. There are thousands of officers out there who haven't learned the lesson. So we keep investigating, keep prosecuting, keep holding people accountable, because that's the only way it changes. The trainee nodded. "Thank you, sir, for fighting that fight." "Thank you for joining it," Marcus said. As Marcus left the academy, he thought about Donovan sitting in a federal prison cell, stripped of his badge, his freedom, his future. 20 years. For 60 seconds of unchecked rage and racial bias. Some lessons are expensive, some costs are steep, and some people only learn when they've lost everything. Marcus hoped the lesson was clear enough that fewer people would have to learn it the hard way. But he wasn't optimistic. History had taught him that some people never learn. Some assumptions are too deeply embedded, some biases too ingrained. So he'd keep doing his job, keep investigating, keep testifying, keep fighting for the day when a black man could drive through Mississippi without fear of being tased, arrested, or killed for the crime of existing. That day hadn't arrived yet, but cases like Donovan's brought it a little closer. He sat in his car with his hands on the wheel, complying with every instruction, calm and respectful, and doing everything right. He identified himself as FBI, showed his credentials, disclosed his weapon, announced every movement. But the officer had already decided who he was. A black man who couldn't possibly be legitimate, who must be lying, who must be a threat. So, within 60 seconds, the officer deployed his taser, 50,000 volts of electricity, excruciating pain, a body convulsing on the side of a highway. All because the officer couldn't reconcile skin color with success. What the officer didn't know was that the man he'd just brutalized wasn't just any victim. He was Special Agent Marcus Williams, FBI, Civil Rights Division, someone who investigated police misconduct for a living, someone who knew the law, someone with the full weight of the federal government behind him. The officer thought he'd neutralized a threat. Instead, he'd just committed multiple federal crimes on camera, and 20 years in federal prison later, he finally understood that badge doesn't protect you from consequences when you abuse the power it gives you. Marcus Williams didn't shout, "Do you know who I am?" during the stop. He stayed calm, stayed professional. Let the evidence speak for itself. The body cam footage showed everything. The jury saw it, the judge saw it, and the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Assault on a federal officer, civil rights violations, excessive force, false statements. The sentencing was brutal. 20 years, not months, not probation. 2 decades in federal prison for 60 seconds of unchecked authority and racial bias. The defense argued it was excessive. The judge disagreed. He cited the pattern of abuse, the 14 prior complaints, the deliberate choice to escalate when de-escalation was possible. He noted that the officer had betrayed his oath, violated the Constitution, and shown no remorse until convicted. 20 years was accountability. Real accountability. The kind that makes other. Officers think twice before they tase someone who's complying, before they assume guilt based on skin color, before they abuse power they think is absolute. Some mistakes cost everything. Some assumptions destroy lives, not just the victims, but the perpetrators. And some people learn far too late that authority means nothing when you violated federal law on camera while assaulting someone who turned out to be the exact person who could hold you accountable. If this story resonated, if you've been profiled, brutalized, treated as criminal for existing while black, hit that like button. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that accountability exists, that consequences are real, and that some badges can't protect you when you've assaulted a federal agent on camera. Subscribe for stories about justice served, power abused and punished, and moments when someone learns their authority has limits they should have respected. Remember, compliance doesn't guarantee safety. Documentation doesn't guarantee justice, but federal charges carry consequences that local departments can't protect you from. And 20 years in prison is a long time to think about 60 seconds of bias that cost you everything.